All right. Well, a morning of Jeffrey Veen and an afternoon of Jared Spool. That's just a good time.
Is it? Or is it just...
Might have sounded a little weird, but you'll just have to... Well, you'll see what I mean, because maybe I'll quit while I'm behind. I think probably most of you met Jared yesterday. If you did not, he is the founder and principal of User Interface Engineering in Boston, also the conference chair of the User Experience Conference. Did I get that right this
User
time?
Interface Conference.
I'll get that. The User Interface Conference, which is held in Boston every fall, as well as a series of roadshows, which he's going to be telling you about. He's going to be talking to us for the remainder of the afternoon until 5:30. We'll be breaking at around 3:30 or so for 15 minutes. And just one more reminder to please turn in your evaluation forms when you do leave us. And I probably won't actually, unless there's another announcement of any kind, be getting up on the stage with a mic in my hand anymore. So let me just thank you all again once more for coming. And I hope you found this conference useful. And I hope we see you again, perhaps in Seattle in July or in Boston in December. Jared, it's all yours, sir. Please welcome Jared Spool.
So this afternoon we're going to talk about something probably a little different than you've been focusing on. We're going to focus on content, the stuff we actually populate our sites with. And this is something that we don't talk about very often, but it turns out that it's what the users are coming from. We can have the best code out there, we can have the best navigation out there, but if there isn't any content that's worth visiting, people aren't going to bother to come to the site. So content is something that is extremely important. It's an extremely critical piece. But the reason we don't talk about it is because until recently there really hasn't been any research that's been done on the topic. There hasn't been anything that people have said to really begin to look at how do we know what content to put there and how do we start to plan around it. So User Interface Engineering, the company I work for, is a research firm. We're a think tank, and what we do is we study problems like this. And for the last 3 or 4 years, we've been looking very specifically into this problem of how do you decide what content to put on a site. So what I'm going to show you today is actually not finished work. It's a work in progress. What you're going to be looking at is our research, where it's at in terms of how do we know what content to put on the site and where to go. And to start talking about this, I want to just talk about the idea of what it's like to come to a website. Before you get to the site, you have really no sense as to what it is that the site is trying to tell you. And it's really, to some extent, a bit fuzzy. And then when you get close, maybe you realize that you don't actually know it was trying to tell you anyways. It's just crazy. This is actually a traffic sign that I came across one day. And I still, to this day, don't know what it was trying to tell me, but at 60 miles an hour on the highway, that's what I was focused on. And so one of these days, I'll know what a gritting is when it's in Pugris. People, on websites, we get a lot of stuff. This is a pop-up box that tell you to stop pop-ups now. There's all sorts of things that happen. There's a site called Stuff on My Cat, which is just populated with content. It's one of the most popular sites on the web, and its purpose in life is to just show off all the things you can put on cats. So what people ask for from content really can be all over the board. And you can have sites like this that are very popular, and you can have sites that have riddles of things that no one wants to go visit. This was the best one voted by all the users of the year, was this whole notion of dressing a cat up in bibs. The work that we do, our research started back in the late 90s, and what we did was we grabbed a handful of people, we sat them down in front of a bunch of sites, and we just sat back and we watched. And we started to realize that there was this whole mix of things that was happening. There were all these different patterns that were there. And initially, we focused on elements of navigation and graphics and a variety of other things to be able to get people to move around the sites. And what I talked about yesterday is a lot of what we've learned in that area. But we've been focusing now for the last few years on this area of content. And there's really two issues that we're trying to deal with. The first one is figuring out how do we decide what content we need on the site, and how do we sort of budget for that? How do we know when we've provided enough? You know, if you're going to put up a site that deals, for instance, with pancreatic cancer, so you're going to put up content for pancreatic cancer, or maybe you're going to build a site which is good information for people learning HTML. It doesn't really matter what the content of the site is. How do you know when you've put enough content on the site? This is a site from thinkgeek.com, and they sell T-shirts. I'm sorry, this is Cafe Press. Cafe Press sells T-shirts, primarily for humans, but they also happen to have a line of T-shirts for dogs. And you can go and get T-shirts for dogs, and they allow you to buy them, and they have a size chart. What you can't read easily here because of the resolution of the projector is that they have instructions for measuring, but unfortunately the instructions they put up accidentally were for measuring people. So it tells you to do things like raise your hand and measure around the fullest part of your chest to get your chest measurement. That doesn't work when you're measuring a dog. And so understanding what the right content is really problematic. This is from the FEMA website, and recently people have really needed the FEMA website. The content on the site has to be right. How do the folks at FEMA know if they have the right materials on the site? How do they know if they have the right content? These are the types of questions that we're looking to answer. The other part of the puzzle with content has to do with why people come. Most of the time when someone comes to a website, it's to render a decision. It's to figure out an answer to a question they have. And it turns out that the process of making decisions is a process that we can map out. It's pretty much the same no matter what decision you're trying to make, whether it's a big decision like where do I want to move or what kind of job do I want, or a small decision like should I get an orange shirt or a green shirt from the Land's End catalog. Those types of decisions still go through the same process. And we've been studying that process and how website design responds to it and looking at the issues behind it. You know, for example, this is a gallery that is presented where the user is supposed to choose between this e-card. This is a set of e-cards. I'm sorry, not e-cards. This is from a gift registry. And so what this is person was intended to, or the person received a gift from this. Hello. Let me start over. My brain is just frogged on this slide. Let's try it again. This is from a gift registry. The person who received the gifts was given this very nice feature to send the people who received the gifts from e-cards to thank them for the gift. But the problem is that it says image not available. It's no longer there. This turns out not to be as useful a function. This is the Amazon gift registry. It's not as useful a function when you can't see what the item was that the user received in order to send the e-card and say, thank you for the thing that you gave me, which I don't know what it is because Amazon won't tell me anymore. The reason Amazon chose to do this, the designers did that, is because they no longer carry the item, and they made a decision that everywhere they no longer carry the item, they'll just put in this image not available thing and won't describe it anymore. But that doesn't help someone on a gift registry, where even though they don't carry it anymore, it's still problematic. This is from the Fidelity website. Here, and people are on this site, they're trying to get information for choosing mortgages. And how do they know which thing to choose? We've got arms and balloons and buyer's choice and interest only. At this point, how do you make a choice? How do you know which one to go to? We have cell phones on the Motorola site. We have to decide which cell phone people want to purchase, or on the SonyEricsson site. All the cell phone sites basically have the same structure where they just present pictures and model numbers and they don't give you any sense of what to choose. So we know that giving people information to be able to decide is really important. Of course, we can give them too much information or the wrong information. We can just populate screens and make it very difficult for people to make choices. We can look at the issues in terms of how do we decide which treatment for cancer we want. And we can start to look at these things and make decisions and understand what's going on. So this is what we're going to spend the time talking about for the rest of the afternoon. We're going to look at how do you decide what content is on the site and how do you help people make decisions about that content. We're going to do it in two parts. Before the break, I'm going to give a presentation which is called What Users Want, which focuses on the first part of that problem. How do we decide what the wealth of content is there? And the second part, which will be the confidence game, where we talk about making decisions confidently. Sound good? Okay. Let's start. So, one of the things they teach writers, first day in writing school, is that you have to know your audience. You have to know who the reader is. And certainly in producing content, that is definitely the case. You have to know who the reader is and what they're trying to do on the site. This is a pair of junk food pajamas that are sold on the Nordstrom site. And what's interesting about this pair of junk food pajamas is that we had a user who came to our labs who was shopping for robes and nightwear, and she came upon this picture. And as soon as she saw this picture, she fell in love with this pair of Nordstrom junk food pajamas. And she was really excited to buy a pair of Nordstrom junk food pajamas. And then all of a sudden, she stopped. She decided not to make the purchase. And when I asked her why she didn't want to make the purchase, she said, well, if I was in the store, what I would do is I would invert the cuff of the pajamas, and I would look at the stitching. And only if the stitching was solid would I make the purchase. Well, at first glance, this seemed like an unreasonable thing to demand of the website. That somehow or other the website would have to communicate what the strength of the stitching was. But the website was communicating quite a bit of other things. For example, it said that the shirt had one chest pocket with side slits, that the bottoms have a comfortable elastic drawstring waist and on-seam pockets, and that the color mint really is more of a blue. So there was all sorts of information that the designers decided to communicate, but they didn't decide to communicate about the stitching. Now, why was the stitching important to her? Well, if you're going to buy a pair of Nordstrom junk food pajamas, which are not cheap pajamas, you're going to spend all that money, you're of course going to want to wear them a lot. And if you're going to want to wear your Nordstrom junk food pajamas a lot, you're going to be the type of person who probably wants to wash them a lot. And if you're going to wash them a lot, you want to make sure they stand up in the wash. You want to make sure they're durable. Nowhere in the content does it say anything about them being durable. But was it a reasonable thing to expect that the people who develop the content would think to put that in? Is it a reasonable expectation for users to have? Well, at another point in time, we were studying how people bought hiking boots. And we were looking at both LL Bean and REI. And it was an interesting study because LL Bean and REI, in essence, sell basically the same boots. They're the same boots. They're actually made in the same factories. They have the same materials. They sell them for the same prices. So everything about them was the same, except the LL Bean boots, which are these, weren't selling nearly as well as the REI boots in our study. And when we compared the sites, the content, the written content was basically the same. The descriptions were the same. The prices were the same. Everything about it was the same. The big difference was the picture. The REI boots happen to show the bottoms of the boots. Now, when you're buying hiking boots, the bottoms of the boots actually are very important. It could mean, life or death if you choose the wrong boots to go hiking with. This isn't true for all footwear. Pumps, for example, don't have this problem. At least not when I shop for them. But hiking boots, this is a consideration. Well, we called the folks at REI because we knew the design team there, and we called them up and we said, we got a question for you. What made you think to show the bottoms of the boots? And they immediately started laughing when we asked the question. And when they finally got around to being able to speak again, they said, well, Larry does that. We said, Larry? He said, Larry, he's the guy who shoots all the pictures of the footwear for the website. So he just turns the boots over. Well, how did Larry know to do that? Well, it turns out Larry worked in one of the stores in the footwear department for 17 years before he joined the web team. So he sold boots for a living. He knew how people bought boots. He knew that when they put them in the displays upside down, they actually sold better than when they put them, with the bottoms touching the tabletop. So they would actually display them this way, and it just was natural to him to take pictures of them this way. It was really sort of a happy accident that the guy on the web team sold footwear for REI, but apparently LL Bean doesn't have anybody from the footwear department on their team. So they didn't know to do that. So now the question comes, should Nordstrom have just gotten somebody from the pajama department to work on the pajama stuff? If they'd done that, would they know that stitching is important? And is it just a matter of getting people who are already experienced with that content, or is there some other formula that we can use? Is there some other idea that we can use to figure out how to get the content we want, how to get things on the screen that help users? So the thing is that if we don't give the users what they need, it affects whatever business objectives we have because they stop coming to the site, they don't do what they need to do, we can't get from them what we want to get from them. On the other hand, if we give too much information, we're wasting valuable resources because this stuff doesn't come for free. It's expensive to get content on that screen. So there's this balance that we have to strike. This idea of having the right content, just the right amount. And that is really what the research that we're doing is all about, trying to identify what the right content is. So how do we go about doing that? Well, you can sort of see evolution in place if you look at how sites have been developed. The first level of evolution was really just about sort of describing what we could think of. So, for instance, if you went to the Disney site in 1995 and you looked at the hotels that they have and the resorts, they were very simple descriptions of the properties, no longer than half a page to describe everything you'd want to know. And of course you had to choose between the 17 hotels that they have at Disney World by just looking at these half-page descriptions. So people basically chose on price because there was really nothing else there of value because they all basically said a great fun place to stay, and they really didn't give any more content of that. But we would start to evolve, and we just basically describe what we had to offer. So we just made sure we had some content for everything we offered. And oftentimes the content we have just doesn't make sense. It's peculiar. This is a CD purchase screen from Best Buy. This is for a CD called Hotel Costa 6. It's a mixed CD put out by a French DJ who runs this club. It's got a lot of great dance music on it, but you couldn't tell from this page because this is everything Best Buy will tell you about this particular CD. They basically tell you the release date of the CD and the label it's on and the price, and that's it. So you have to pretty much know all about this CD, and that it has great dance music, and that's put out by Steve Pompidou, who's a French DJ who happens to work in Central Paris. You need to know all that from external sources to be able to decide to buy this CD. So, not surprisingly, this is probably not a popular CD on their site. And because it's not a popular CD, they're not putting a whole lot of time into it. You know, there's this cyclical effect. Well, it doesn't sell. Well, we shouldn't spend time on it. Well, it doesn't. Okay. So you get this real sort of cyclical thing going. This is from SonyEricsson. This is their one of their phone descriptions, and I just love this text here. Empowered by Edge. Edge is a 3G compliant data transfer technology that is up to 3 times faster than GPRS. If you value speed, and I must say I do value speed, the Z500 is for you. What does that actually mean? This is SonyEricsson's first Edge-enabled phone. I guess that's a good thing. Messaging, interactive online gaming, and content download have never been faster. I can believe that because I've never noticed them to be slow, but you know, I don't do too many interactive games on my phone other than tag. Then it says, looking good with a purpose. Dress your Z500 to suit your style and taste with cool style-up covers. Flip closed, and there's the camera viewfinder and a 4096 color external display. That's good, because my 4094 color one is just not cutting it. Open the flip and find a 128 by 160 pixels, 65,536 color display. Okay. I mean, how do people understand what this means? I mean, what is this about? This is just marketing people sitting down and writing up specs in sort of happy talk. But it doesn't help you actually choose this phone. It doesn't help you understand why this phone is going to be important in your life. So it's missing that sort of key element. Daniel.
Is it possible that SonyEricsson is giving a description like this because they're not actually trying to give you too much detail, because a place like Verizon Wireless or Singular or Sprint, they may be depending on those companies instead to actually give the valuable information?
It could be that SonyEricsson has chosen to be completely vague about this because they're relying on the carriers to actually move the product for them. But we see copy like this in all sorts of places that have nothing to do with cell phones and carriers and manufacturers. So I'm thinking that this is just people saying, damn it, we need something on the page, and they hire somebody and they say, here's the spec sheet, go write something to put on the page, and no one ever asks the question, is this actually helping anyone? And there's probably a good chance that they don't even know what it is people are coming to the page to get, so they just put something up as a placeholder thinking that someday someone will complain and then they'll put that up too. So to get beyond this, to get to the sort of this next level of content, you've got to produce, you got to really sort of take the entire experience that the user is going through into account. You have to look at why people are coming to the site and understand really what's going on. And there's a bunch of aspects to look at this, and our research has sort of turned up a whole bunch of different things. And so what I'm going to talk to you now about are some of these attributes that we've discovered in our research. We're going to talk about tool knowledge and domain knowledge, which are two different types of knowledge that users have that you might be needing to augment. We're going to talk about what's called the needs solution spectrum, which is how people determine what they need, and something called empathic content. And in talking about these things, what's going to come out is that coming up with good content is really hard. It really requires dedicated resources, and it requires thinking about this stuff. And that's really one of the big challenges we have, and that's really why sites like BestBuy and SonyEricsson are not providing that information. It isn't because they have a lack of desire to do so, but because it just really is very difficult for it. The question is, when I'm saying dedicated content developers, do I mean dedicated just web content? Well, it really depends on the model of the organization who has the website. It's possible that the content could be multi-source, or single source for multi-destinations. You could use in other places. But as we're going to see, content on the web takes a different form than content other places. I'm not eliminating the idea that you could have single source in some situations. It's just one of those things where a lot of people start with single source as an objective, and before they know whether it's really the right thing to do, and then down the line discover that what you've done with single source is you've created this lowest common denominator content that doesn't work anywhere. What's better is if you sort of start assuming multi-source and then down the road discover that single source will work for you and you can optimize, right? Single source is an optimization. And just in programming, I started as a software engineer in my career, and there's an old saying in programming which is you never optimize code that doesn't work in the first place, right? It doesn't make sense to take buggy code and start optimizing it because it'll still be buggy at the end and it doesn't matter how fast it is. And the same goes with single sourcing. That's an optimization. And you shouldn't be doing an optimization before you know whether you've got the right content in its unoptimized state. We can pick on marketing people. They're all in the Photoshop session. That's right. People, that's exactly right. That's what we did. People just want to take printed brochures, and keep in mind that printed brochures, 99% of the time, organizations do not know whether they're effective brochures or not because they just put them out and they have no clue whether that was the thing that caused users to act or not. So you're taking something which is not proven to begin with, and you're putting it up on the website with the hope that that will be good enough so we don't have to spend any more time on it. And it's really just a lack of being able to commit the resources to doing what's necessary. And the interactive experience is very different than the store experience, for example, where a salesman can come up and fill in the gaps that a brochure is leaving. So you get this situation where it's not just a matter of taking brochure content and putting it up on the site. So let's talk about some of these things. To start by talking about these things, I want to talk about knowledge. And in particular, I want to talk about all the knowledge a user could have about the content that's there. So we can represent that by drawing an arrow. And if we place a user at this end of the arrow, at the left end of the arrow, that means that the user doesn't have much knowledge at all. If we place that same user at the right end of the arrow, it means they know everything there is to know about that. And it's an arrow because pretty much for any topic, there's an infinite amount of knowledge. So you can always learn more. There's 2 points on this line that are of interest to us. The first one's called current knowledge. That's the knowledge that the user has at the time they come to the site. So when they walk up to the interface, what do they already know? That's current knowledge. The other knowledge that we need to know about, the other point, is what we call target knowledge. Target knowledge is the knowledge the user needs to have in order to accomplish their goal. So we have the knowledge they have when they walk up to the design, and they have the knowledge they have when they come to accomplish their goal. Those are 2 extremely important points. The space between that has a technical name. It's called the gap. Subsequently, a whole line of stores was named after it. The gap, the knowledge gap, is where design happens. So when we talk about designing something, we are talking about designing for the gap. Okay? You don't have to design for this space before current knowledge because users already know that stuff. So you don't have to do anything for that. And you don't have to explore this space beyond target knowledge because users won't need that stuff. So when we're talking about design to help users accomplish their goals, we only need to design for this space here between current knowledge and target knowledge. Now, it turns out that it's that this is where the notion of intuitive happens. We talk about things being intuitive. You've heard this phrase? You know, I want the interface to be intuitive. Well, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Interfaces can't be intuitive. They can't intuit anything. Intuitive is really a shortcut. It's a term we use incorrectly, but we use it consistently incorrectly, so we can get away with it. And what we're trying to say is that the user intuits the interface. So when an interface is intuitive, it's not the interface that's actually intuitive, it's the user that's intuitive about the interface. And this happens when one of two conditions occurs. Either current knowledge and target knowledge are the exactly same point. In other words, I walk up to the screen and I know exactly what to do. That will be intuitive to me because I'll just walk up and I'll say, oh yeah, I need to click here, I need to click here, and yes, it's got me the stuff I need, boom, I'm done. Okay? Or the space between those two is so small that the user doesn't realize they're transitioning. It turns out there's only two ways that you can get a user from current knowledge to target knowledge. You can either train them, teach them something, and that moves their current knowledge up until it collides with target knowledge, or you can, in essence, make whatever it is simpler by eliminating things they need to know and thereby bringing target knowledge down. So if you do that, you can make something intuitive. Let me give you an example. I'm staying at a hotel over in Union Square, and I went to call a friend who lives here in San Francisco. And I went up to the phone, picked it up, wanted to dial a local number. What's the first number I had to dial? 9, right? That's intuitive, right? Well, you all know it. Okay. When did you learn that 9 is how you get a local number? I mean, at what point in your life did this happen? Does anyone remember the moment they learned that? You just know. You remember the moment you learned it? Okay. So 9 has become this number. Why 9? And who made that decision? So at some point, someone chose a 9. Okay. Well, interestingly enough, at this particular hotel, it's not 9. It's 8. What idiot would choose 8? Okay. Why would they decide 8? How unintuitive could you make it? Right? But it didn't bother me because on the phone was a little sign that said in big letters, dial 8 for local calls. In fact, on the handset, there was a sticker that said dial 8 for local calls. And on the wall behind the phone, there was a sign in big letters that said dial 8 for local calls. So when I walked up to the phone, I glanced at it, I picked it up, and I dialed 8. I didn't even think about it. Now, I had been trained to dial 8 in that very moment. Up until that point, I would have naturally dialed 9. But I had been trained to dial 8. By just the design of that instance. It wasn't a very gracious design, but it worked. It did the trick. And so it seemed intuitive to me. So that's what intuitive is all about. So whenever anybody talks to you about intuitive, now you can explain to them what that means. It means target knowledge and content knowledge are so close together that the user doesn't realize they're jumping from one to the next. But this gets a little bit more complicated. There's actually two types of arrows we could have. We can have an arrow representing tool knowledge and an arrow representing domain knowledge. Tool knowledge is stuff about the tool itself. So in the case of websites, it's about using the website. So if I'm filing my taxes on one of these online sites to file my taxes, it's going to be about using that site. All the details about using that site, filing electronically, downloading PDFs, all the details that are there, the mechanics. So this is from the H&R Block site. And they understand that there are a lot of people who are using H&R Block's online tax stuff. For many people, is one of their first real online experiences. People buy computers just to do their taxes online, and they know this. So they have designed their site to actually answer questions. So they've used this clever little screen in a screen design to actually show you how to use it. So they're dealing with tool knowledge on the screen. It's not helping you do your taxes per se. It's just helping you use their tax tool. Domain knowledge has to do with the knowledge that's specific to the domain. So if I'm talking about online taxes, the knowledge that's specific to the domain is going to be things like, well, what's the difference between an exemption and a dependent? And, what officially qualifies as a deduction? And if the kids live with me 7 months a year and they live with my ex the remainder of the time, how do I know how to list them on the form? These are questions that are independent of the tool that I'm using. It doesn't matter what tool I'm using to do my taxes, I'm still going to need to have this information to file my taxes. So we have tool knowledge, which is specific to the tool, and we have domain knowledge, which is about whatever the domain is. And some problems actually deal with multiple domains. For instance, getting a mortgage requires that you know something about buying a house, something about working with banks, something about how mortgage and interest rates are calculated. You've got at least 3 domains involved in that process that the user has to be knowledgeable on in order to make the right choice. So domain knowledge is just a different thing. So on the tax site, they understand about the problems people have with domain knowledge, so they're very careful to use English questions, not use IRS jargon per se. They put quick help up to help you understand, who qualifies as a child, what if I got married during the year, all sorts of things in that regard. And as you start the process of filling out your taxes, they even go to the extent of they have a 3-step method for filing your taxes, but then they have this intro, right? The intro is tool time, or tool knowledge. People who have any amount of computer experience are probably going to read that and skip it and go straight to preparing their return. But people new to the tool are going to have that. So the H&R Block people have thought about this, and they've very carefully crafted a design that accounts for the fact that people come in at different levels, and they're allowing them to navigate that way. And you can do things. You can actually take these 2 lines. So this is tool knowledge here, going from none to expert. We have domain knowledge, which goes from none to expert. And we can plot our users. So as we learn more about our users, we can put the specific users down in this chart and see if they cluster in certain ways. So for example, we can look here and where it says lots of tool knowledge with little domain knowledge. We could have, for instance, someone who is a 23-year-old who's just graduated with their bachelor's in engineering, who is mastered computer technology, has no trouble with Excel and the web and all these different tools, but is filing their taxes for the first time on their own and doesn't know anything about doing that. So for the first time, they are dealing with that. So that they would live in this quadrant. Or we could be talking about a 55-year-old tax attorney that I met who had been doing taxes for 25, 30 years for people, but was now using the computer for the first time. And that person had a lot of domain knowledge, but almost no tool knowledge. You wouldn't have to explain what an exemption and a dependent was to that person. In fact, if the software tried to explain to that person what that was, he'd get really insulted. But you did have to explain to him what the different buttons on the mouse did. So it's a completely sort of different approach. And so this is actually a very useful exercise. If you haven't done this, sitting down and just plotting your users and seeing if you have clusters. What do the tax people do when they discover that they have these two groups, one up here and one down here? They create completely different products. They have a consumer-grade product that's really spans this area, the lower half of this chart here. And then they have a professional product, which is intended for attorneys and tax accountants and other people who do multiple returns. And that really spans the upper side of this. And they don't even try to do it all in one shot. And a lot of places find that that's just easier. Underneath, it's the same code base, but they just got different content. So when we're talking about websites, what we're talking about in terms of tool knowledge is this notion of expectations. And putting things on the site that other people expect. Now, if you've had a chance to visit my blog, you'll find out that I'm not real big on this notion of consistency, that pages should be consistent from one part of the site to the other. I don't actually think that's true. The experience that I've had is if every page has exactly the content on it that the user needs, they could care less whether it looks like any other page they visited. After all, in between visits to your site, they visit like 500 other sites, none of which look the same, and they have no problem with that. So the issue isn't whether things are consistent, but it is about understanding the current knowledge the user has. If the user expects things to be in a certain place because their knowledge dictates that, like using 9 for the outgoing number, then utilizing that makes sense. What will happen is you'll have consistency where consistency makes sense, but you won't have consistency in places where users don't care. So you'll end up with something that is inconsistently consistent. But what you'll get from that is an interface that actually meets expectations. So it's all about sort of understanding expectations, which means you have to know what the conventions are. You have to understand what they are. On the Avis website, there's a form that uses an asterisk next to the field name to tell the user that that field is optional. Really mucks people up. Okay. Now, the designers, I'm thinking, had a logical reason to do this. They have 25 forms on the site, and this was the only form with optional information. Every other form, every field was mandatory. So if they were to use the standard convention of having an asterisk meaning mandatory, they would have had an asterisk next to every field on every form except for this one. Seemed like an awful waste of asterisks. Okay. And it might have been weird to users to why do they bother telling me that this is required when everything's required. So they thought, well, we're only going to mention it when it's not required. And they decided to use the asterisk. The problem here wasn't that they decided to tell people that stuff was optional. The problem was they decided to choose an asterisk. Because an asterisk is a convention that has started. Nobody knows where it started. It just did. That means mandatory on many sites. So people coming with that expectation, coming to this form, were being asked to put in their middle name, and we didn't discover it until we found a user who didn't have a middle name and felt they couldn't submit the form until they got one. And so this, caused a bit of consternation. Now, what they could have done was instead of putting the asterisk, just put the word optional. That would have worked just fine. But because somebody felt that this was the way to do it, they chose this particular method, and it got them into trouble. So it's all about this notion of conventions, knowing when to break them, when not to break them. usability testing turns out to be the best way to spot this sort of thing. As soon as you do a usability test, what you're doing when you do a usability test, it's very simple, is you're seeing the design through the eyes of your users. And if there are places where you're breaking conventions, those things come right up. You spot them right away. Domain knowledge is different. Domain knowledge means that you have to go past the tool itself. You have to go beyond that. You have to really sort of get into your head sort of this larger context of use. What is the entire problem the user is trying to solve, and how do we really understand what that is? And the problem with this is that the reason we haven't dealt with domain knowledge very much is because it's really a much harder problem to solve, and we're only beginning now to get our heads around it. So it becomes a real challenge. This is where things like focus groups and field studies and techniques like that become extremely valuable. Now, I don't know about you, but I like to read. In fact, I like to read so much that I'm constantly reading all the time. Every room in my house has reading material in it. Every single one. One day, I was in one of the rooms of my house, and I'd run out of reading material. I'd read everything that was there, pretty much. And unfortunately, due to my situation, I couldn't move for another few minutes. So I grabbed the only thing in the room that I hadn't read yet, which was a roll of toilet paper. And I was fascinated to find that there were things on the toilet paper that I'd never seen before. In particular, this roll of toilet paper said, check out our website, www.scottbrandtissues.com. I got to tell you, it never occurred to me that toilet paper would have a website. How many people have ever visited the Scott Brand Tissues website? I have. This is it. It intrigued me to no end. One of the things that intrigued me is that they have help. And if you click on the help, you get an FAQ. I didn't know people had questions about toilet paper, but apparently they do. One of the interesting things is they had this question here: is Scott tissues safe for sewer and septic systems? The answer is yes. Of course, what you didn't know is that on the back of the toilet paper, it actually said that, safe for sewer and septic systems. So I'd already known the answer to this question before I got here. I didn't know the answer to this question down here. When was Scott Tissue introduced? I thought, now we're getting to something. But interestingly enough, in the tradition of good marketing writing, it doesn't actually answer the question. It just says, in 1913, Scott Paper Company's snow tissue was renamed Scott Tissue, marking the beginning of the Scott brands. That wasn't exactly the answer I was looking for. I was sort of wondering when they first started making this stuff. But okay, that's fine. The site was filled with all sorts of stuff. It had time-saving tips. Did you know that? And some of the time-saving tips are things like, keep a good tablecloth under the everyday one for surprise visitors. I'd never thought of doing that. Or, learn the layout of the stores where you shop and write lists according to the order of the store. Also, sometimes make it a point to browse hard-to-find items. Then make a mental note that thumbtacks are in the office supply aisle and tablecloth clamps are in the detergent aisle. I don't even know what a tablecloth clamp is. I guess it's to keep all the tablecloths on the table. Somebody spent an awful lot of time creating this content, but for what reason? Why would people go to a toilet paper site? Do you know? They ran out of reading material. That's right. So, to sort of look at this problem of identifying what domain content we need and how to make sure we're not wasting our time producing content that's not useful, we started to look at where do users turn. So we took a particular topic area, which was medical information, in particular the issues surrounding chronic neurological illnesses. And we decided to study websites where users go to talk about these things, under the theory that when people can't find information online, they turn to each other to get answers. So we went and we visited a discussion group board called braintalk.org, which is a discussion group where 45,000 people suffering from chronic neurological illnesses visit every day. And we started to look at the conversations they were having and look at the questions they were asking to see if we could see any pattern. Now this, for example, is one of the multiple sclerosis boards that they have. This is just one of 70 different diseases that are under discussion at this board. And they have almost 1 million different questions that people have asked in the years that this board has been operating about multiple sclerosis, just about that one topic. And you can see that posts come in very quickly. Here we have a series of posts that are within less than an hour. People are just constantly posting to this board. And some of these things are really, really hard to read. And this is one here. This is from a 25-year-old woman who isn't sure if she has early symptoms of MS. She has a learning disability, and she's not clear if what she's seeing is her learning disability or what she's seeing is MS. And this is an extremely scary thing. And so she's sort of describing her situation and asking what other people think. Because she's been to the doctor, but the doctors have been really confusing, and she's just not sure what to do. And this was a typical post that we went through 3,000 posts just like this. It was so difficult to read these things on a daily basis that we would have to limit our researchers to only looking at 50 a day, and then they'd have to go work on another project because it was just too emotionally exhausting to just go through and read the discussions that these people were having. But what we were able to do when we read through these posts was we started to see patterns in what people were asking, the types of questions people asked. And when we analyzed the patterns across a variety of different ailments, we found that basically there were only 14 types of things that people asked. 14 types of questions. And while, people discussing autism or ADHD asked had different quantities of each of the 14 things than people, for instance, Parkinson's or MS, what we saw was that the 14 types really stood up pretty well. Here are some of the 14 types. So we have things, questions about dealing with family and friends, how to choose special equipment like a wheelchair or a respirator, dealing with the medical profession, having people, for instance, a lot of questions had to do with the doctor told me this but then left the room and I have no idea what he meant. Could someone explain to me what he just told me? Okay. So there were lots of things that dealt with those types of issues. Other things were like, I'm finding that my hearing keeps coming and going. Is that an MS-related thing, or do I potentially have something else that's wrong with me? So trying to understand symptoms that are problematic that way. People just having theoretical discussions about disease and research. Dealing with bureaucracies was a very popular one. When you have a child who's autistic, dealing with the school system is a big deal. Trying to get your public school system to give that kid the service they need turns out to be a real challenge for a lot of parents. So lots of discussions of dealing with that particular bureaucracy. Dealing with insurance companies. When you buy a wheelchair, convincing the insurance company to pay a little bit more money so that you get a wheelchair that's going to be very comfortable turns out to be a big deal. So there are all these details that came out when we did this analysis. This, for example, is one thing which we call diagnosis explanation. So we saw several posts, one for Parkinson's where person is talking about what happened when their father visited for the first time. A person with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, talking about a particular symptom that they have. We saw all these types of things popping up. Now, one question was, well, did we just happen upon 14 things that were specific to medical stuff? If we looked at financial services, if we looked at tech support, if we looked at lawyers talking to lawyers about things like Sarbanes-Oxley, would we see a different category scheme? And what we found when we studied those forums was, in fact, the same 14 types pretty much held up. We had to change the names because diagnoses and treatment no longer applied. But we were able to, using the same basic ideas, use the same 14 types. So it turns out that, at least for the 20 or so subject areas we've currently studied, there's only 14 things people ask about. And that can become a framework that we can use to figure out what to put on the site, what content to put there. So I'm going to talk about 3 of these right now, three of these types of things out of the 14, because just to give you an idea of what they might be. The first one has to do with need solutions. Okay, so it turns out that there's a spectrum that you can think of that has to do with where you are in terms of solving a problem. Now, in the medical world, this has to do with getting a diagnosis and then getting a treatment for that diagnosis. In non-medical stuff, it's just a generic identifying a need and then solving that need by applying some solution to it, choosing a solution that you're going to use. Well, it turns out there's all sorts of content that users need around this thing. In fact, there's 5 different types of things. We need to have content that helps us identify what needs in the first place. We need content that lets us zone in on identifying the need. Then isolating the various alternatives we have, choosing a specific solution, and then refining that solution. What I'm going to talk about right now are 2 that we very rarely talk. Almost all content on websites deals with these 2 things. Figuring out what your choices are and then choosing one. But I'm going to talk about content on the ends of the spectrum, identifying needs and refining solutions, because it turns out that those are very, very interesting. Let's start with identifying needs. So this is at the moment that a user just becomes vaguely aware that they might need something, just vaguely aware that something might be useful to them. Zipcar is a site. Zipcar is an East Coast thing. I don't think they have them out here on the West Coast. It's a service, a rental car service, that allows you to rent cars by the hour. So if you're a city dweller in New York, Boston, Philadelphia, D.C., you can subscribe to this service. And if you need a car just to go to a doctor's appointment or just to go to Home Depot to pick some stuff up and bring it back, you can get it just for the hour you need it, or 2 hours, or whatever you need. And you just pay for that. So if you only need a car 4 hours a month, 5 hours a month, you can have it. So that's a very cool service if you live in the city. The problem is it's such a new service that people don't even realize they need this. This is just something so radically different that they don't realize that this is something they need. So Zipcar's site has to have content to help you realize that you have this need for which they have a solution. And so they have this survey that you fill out, the Is It For Me survey, where you can then check off different things that are part of your life, and then based on what you check off, they then give you descriptions of people who have successfully used Zipcar to handle those types of situations. It's a clever little tool. Does it work? I'm not sure. But it's interesting that they're trying to solve that particular problem, this just identifying the need. Is this something I actually need? This is from Procrit.com. Procrit is a drug that treats anemia. And what Procrit is interested in doing is getting you to talk to your doctor to get the doctor to prescribe. Because you can't go in and just buy it off the shelf. You have to have a doctor prescribe this thing. They want you to get your doctor to prescribe it. But they don't just go in and say, well, tell your doctor you need Procrit. What they do is they give you a bunch of questions to ask your doctor at your next appointment. And these questions have to do with the symptoms, right? Is it normal to feel tired or weak on my medication? Why am I not able to do things I used to do? Could I be anemic? What is my red blood cell count? So they're training the potential customer of this product to go and ask the doctor these questions so that the doctor can then say, well, gee, actually you are looking a bit anemic. That is a problem. And then, what the makers of Procrit would like, I think it's Johnson & Johnson, you to do is say, well, yeah, get Procrit for this person. So that's what they're trying to do with this page. So this, again, is that sort of identifying needs content. This is the Peapod site. Peapod is a home-delivered grocery site. And it's much like Zipcar. It's something that people don't realize they need. They don't understand humans have gotten along for thousands of years without having home-delivered groceries, but all of a sudden, it's a priority. And so they create a site, and this is the home page for the site. And, really, there is this content here that says new to Peapod, and then groceries for your home, groceries for your business. So it does tell you that they do deliver home and business, but that's all they say. They don't really explain why you might be in a situation for which this is a good idea. But if you click on groceries for your home, it brings you to this page, which doesn't really tell you anything about why you might want this service. But you do have to enter your zip code. And this sort of breaks one of the cardinal rules, which is people don't like to give up personal information until they know what they're going to get for that personal information. So here you're asking for a zip code, but people don't know, why are you asking me for my zip code? What am I going to do with that? So the reason they need to ask you for a zip code is because they actually have different services in different communities, and they want to provide the right stuff, but they don't tell you that anywhere. When you finally do get to the page, again, it's really sort of vague. They have this page here, this thing here that says Learn More, and check out our quick guide for fast answers about the basics of our service. But I'm having to dig really deep to start to see it. And even when I get to that part, figuring out exactly what problem this solves, it's not clear. So they're expecting that the user comes to the site already knowing that they want this service. They're not doing anything to help them deal with that particular stage. And they've got all this stuff over here, but it's really sort of hard to navigate and hard to get through. You have to jump up and down and do what's called pogo sticking, which we'll talk about a little bit later, to get to it, and it doesn't really ever help. Now, contrast that to the homepage of Netflix. If you visit Netflix and you've never been a subscriber before, you get this page, which tells you all in just 6 bullets and a couple of diagrams exactly what Netflix is all about and why you should subscribe. And this page does wonders. So it doesn't take a lot of complicated stuff to communicate this. But you have to understand that people need this content, and you have to give it to them right away. So this idea of identifying needs is a piece of the puzzle. It's very early in the process. So think about why people who are coming to your site service, is there a collection of people out there who don't even know why they're coming? Who don't even know what you're going to bring to them? Are you giving them anything to help them understand what that value is? People who haven't even established, before they start understanding that you're the solution, do they even understand what the need is? Are you giving them that information? A lot of sites can benefit from this content, but it's one of the things that's very frequently missing. Yesterday, during the deconstructing section, we looked at the Hobbies Auto Center site, which just assumed you knew why you were coming to that site. It did not give you any information as to why you might want to choose them. Intranets have this problem all the time. If you're an intranet designer, particularly if you're putting new features on your intranet, one of the big issues is that people don't realize why they need those features. Getting people, if you're creating a portion of your intranet to help with purchasing office supplies, to reduce costs, to be able to purchase them centrally, do people understand why they would want to use that thing? What the benefit of using that is? Solution refinement is the other end of the spectrum. So whereas needs identification is at the front of the process, solution refinement is after the person has made their choices and they are now refining their solution. And this is a completely different type of issue. This has to do with the fact that once people do something like buy a car, they still need support for that car. They need to get the most out of it. They need to keep it maintained. They need all sorts of information specific to operating that car. And for people who are very intent on increasing their brand, it turns out that this part, strengthening a brand, this part of the process is huge for strengthening the brand because the person's already decided that you're good enough to buy from. They want to keep coming back to you to get enhancement and to get refinement, and then they become word of mouth, and all that keeps going forward. This is the Humane Society website, and they have a page about moving with your pet. Okay? Well, it turns out that moving is very traumatic to pets. And so they have a whole bunch of content on the site to help people move. Now, the thing is that these people have had their pet for a really long time, potentially. I mean, they could have had the pet for years and years and years and not had to deal with the Humane Society at all beyond that initial acquisition of the pet. But now they're moving, and the Humane Society is stepping up to the plate and giving content to help them with that problem. This is, again, from the Procrit site. This is dealing with side effects, right? And that's a common thing with drugs. So you're taking Procrit, you're having some side effects. What are some things you can do to alleviate the side effects of anemia? Well, you need to get a full night's sleep. When you need to rest, you want to lie down often, but only for short periods of time. So they're putting all sorts of content up to help people at that point in the process. Again, Netflix is very, very good at keeping people coming back to the site through their recommendation engine, through their social networking capabilities. They are always having people come back to the site, choose more movies, keep going, because they want people to continue to benefit the thing and to go around telling all their friends about it. So Netflix is an excellent site to study for this type of stuff. Pomona College has a page on their site that is specific to parents of incoming freshmen. So this page is pure. So here you've got kids who've gone through the application process. They've been accepted. The parents have cut the initial checks. And now